Right then, settle in with a nice cuppa, because I've got rather a tale to tell you. Before we continue though, do be a dear and subscribe to the channel, and pop a comment below telling us what time it is where you are now. Because nothing says family bonding quite like crowdsourcing your global audience whilst your offspring plots your demise. Marvelous, isn't it? Now, my name is Cassandra Reed, and at the time this all kicked off, I was 35 years old and what you might call a marine researcher. Fancy term, really, for someone who spends an inordinate amount of time getting wet and cold whilst studying ocean ecosystems. Not quite the career path my family had in mind, but we'll get to that shortly. The heart of this story, and what a beating, complicated heart it is, centers around a rather lovely waterfront house that my grandparents left to me. It's perched right on the edge of Olympic National Park in Washington State, you see. America, not our Washington, though wouldn't that be convenient? This house became my anchor, as it were, between expeditions. A proper home port whilst I gallivanted about studying coastlines and marine life. I'd been away for 18 months. 18 whole months up in Maine, of all places, tracking coastal erosion. Fascinating work, if you're into that sort of thing, which I decidedly am. When I finally returned to Seattle for what I thought would be a pleasant family dinner, well, let's just say things took rather an unexpected turn. My sister stood right up in the middle of the meal, mind you, which should have been my first clue that something was amiss, and announced, grinning from ear to ear like she just won the lottery, that the house had sold. For $500,000. $500,000. The family erupted in applause, actually applauded, calling it a brilliant move. Now, I don't know about you, but when someone sells your house without your permission, brilliant isn't quite the word that springs to mind. I may have snapped a bit. How dare you? I believe were my exact words, though in retrospect, I could have been more eloquent. Before I could elaborate on precisely how much she dared, my dear sister slapped me. Actually slapped me, right there at the dinner table. Then she shoved me toward the door and hissed, proper dramatic hiss, like a pantomime villain. "Get out, loser." Charming, really. Everyone froze, as you might imagine. Rather killed the jovial atmosphere. But here's the thing. I stayed remarkably calm. You see, I knew something they didn't. The property was locked up tighter than a drum under federal conservation laws. Couldn't be sold, couldn't be mortgaged, couldn't be developed. Legally speaking, it was about as movable as Stonehenge. The next morning, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. 25 missed calls in 30 minutes. Her voicemail absolutely shook with panic. "They caught me," she whispered, voice trembling like autumn leaves. I leaned back in my chair, kept my voice perfectly steady, and replied with 3 simple words. "Too late, loser." What she didn't know, what none of them knew really, was the legal trap that had been waiting all this time to snap shut. Rather like a very patient mousetrap, if you will. Now, you might be wondering whether I should forgive her or walk away entirely. Do share your thoughts in the comments, won't you? Because sometimes one small decision can change an entire life. Or in this case, several lives, none of them particularly for the better. Looking back 18 months helps explain why I remained so preternaturally calm during that disastrous family dinner. You see, my family had been pressuring me for years, mind you, to mortgage the property. They wanted to fund their real estate ventures, and my sister led this particular charge with the enthusiasm of a general at Waterloo. She kept going on about how the land was wasting potential near prime coastal development areas. Every family gathering became another opportunity for her to bang on about property values and investment opportunities. I refused every single time, knowing full well that the federal easements protected it as critical marine habitat for endangered whales. Rather Trump's property development, that, at least in the eyes of the law. But she wouldn't let it drop, especially after her own investments went spectacularly south. Lost big on cryptocurrency trades, don't we all know someone who did? And then there was a failed cafe business that went down faster than the Titanic. Left her in debt up to her eyeballs. Dad and Mum covered some of the losses, as parents do, but she needed more. Always more. Just sign the mortgage papers, she demanded during one particularly tedious visit to Seattle. It's family helping family. Family helping family. That old chestnut. I saw her desperation. You'd have to be blind not to, and I decided to turn it against her. Terrible of me, perhaps, but there we are. I pretended to agree, said I'd consider a preliminary contract with some investors she knew. Strung her along a bit, if we're being honest. In reality, I contacted Travis Coleman, an old college friend who'd become a real estate lawyer based in Seattle. Frightfully useful, having lawyer friends. He reviewed all the documents and confirmed what I already knew. The easements made any mortgage or development deal completely illegal without federal approval. This could be a setup, Travis advised over coffee one afternoon, stirring his latte with that precise lawyer way they have. If she forges anything, we report it immediately to prevent escalation. We drafted what you might call a rather clever plan. I gave vague verbal consent but never signed anything official. Nothing on paper, nothing binding. Travis prepared reports for environmental agencies, all ready to file the moment she crossed the line. Rather like loading a gun and waiting to see if someone would be foolish enough to stand in front of it. My sister jumped at my fake compliance like a trout at a fly. Thought she'd won, poor thing. Started contacting investors immediately, promising quick returns on coastal property. I documented everything, naturally. Every email, every text message, all copied to Travis. One does like to be thorough. Meanwhile, I strengthened the property's protections by submitting new data on whale migration patterns to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They added even stricter designations, making any unauthorized deal not just illegal but spectacularly, unambiguously illegal. The sort of illegal that comes with federal agencies and very serious people in very serious suits asking very serious questions. As my main research trip to Maine approached, I knew she'd act whilst I was gone. Bullies and fraudsters always do, don't they? Strike when you're not looking. Travis agreed to monitor the property records remotely. If she files a fraudulent mortgage or contract, he said, adjusting his glasses in that way lawyers do when they're about to say something terribly important, we'll catch it early and alert the authorities. The easements weren't just paper protections, you see. They were my weapon. Binding the land to perpetual conservation meant no investor could touch it without triggering federal reviews. My grandparents had enrolled it decades ago for tax benefits, clever souls, but it had the rather permanent effect of locking out development forever. Rather like putting a medieval curse on the property, except recognized by the federal government. I left for Maine feeling quite confident that her scheme would backfire through legal channels alone. Gravity and the law, you see, both quite reliable forces. Now, the pressure from my sister didn't just materialize out of thin air. It rooted back to our childhood in Seattle, growing up in the suburbs there. Our family was all about real estate deals and flipping properties for profit. Dad led the business like a captain at sea, buying up land to turn into condos or shopping centers. Mum handled the paperwork and client meetings, the organizational backbone of the operation. They raised us to value money and success above everything else, really. Pushed us toward careers that paid well, never mind whether we actually enjoyed them. Victorian work ethic meets American capitalism, if you will. My older sister, Deborah Vaughan, yes, we've got a name for our antagonist now. Fit right in from the start. Helped Dad with open houses as a teenager. Joined the firm full-time later. Thrived on closing deals. Always wittering on about market trends and investment returns. Spoke fluent property developer, that one. Laurie, my younger sister, followed suit like a dutiful duckling. Studied business in college. Interned with them during summers. The perfect middle child, really. Always trying to keep the peace whilst backing the winning side. But I was different from early on. Spent my weekends exploring the beaches near Puget Sound, collecting shells and watching tide pools instead of attending property viewings. Absolutely fascinated by the natural world, you see. Still am. My parents dismissed it as a phase. You'll grow out of it and get a real job, they said, with that particular tone parents use when they're trying to be encouraging but are actually rather disappointed. They mocked my interest in marine biology, called it playing with fish, when I brought home books on ocean conservation. Charming dinner conversation, that. Nothing says family warmth quite like having your passions belittled over roast chicken. Family dinners often turned into lectures about how my hobbies wouldn't pay the bills. "Look at Deborah," Mum would say, gesturing with her fork. "She's already making commissions." Dad would nod sagely, adding, "We need practical skills in this family." Practical skills. As if understanding ecosystem collapse wasn't practical. After school, I pursued a degree in marine science, which they tolerated with the enthusiasm one might reserve for a persistent cold. Never supported it, mind you, but they stopped actively complaining. Progress, of a sort. Holidays brought arguments about my impractical choices, with Deborah rolling her eyes and Laurie staying diplomatically quiet. I volunteered at local aquariums, learning about coastal ecosystems, but they saw it as time wasted. Time I could have been spending making money, presumably. Then came the inheritance 7 years ago. Our grandparents passed away within months of each other. Happens that way sometimes with couples who've been together forever, doesn't it? Rather poignant. They left their waterfront house in Washington specifically to me. Not to be divided, not to be sold and split. To me. The place bordered Olympic National Park with direct access to protected coastal areas. Absolutely magnificent property, the sort you'd see in a film and think, nobody actually lives like that. My family was furious. Absolutely spitting. They'd expected to sell it and split the proceeds, you see. Turn it into nice, divisible money. "It's prime land," Deborah argued at the reading of the will, as if Grandma and Granddad had simply made a clerical error. "We could develop it into vacation rentals." But I visited and fell completely in love with it. Remembered how my grandparents had taught me to identify sea stars and monitor kelp forests. They'd always emphasized preserving the coastline, saw themselves as temporary stewards rather than owners. Rather wise, really. Whilst settling the estate, I discovered the federal easements on the property. Buried in the deeds were agreements from decades ago, enrolling the land in perpetual conservation programs in exchange for tax breaks. Frightfully sensible of them. They'd restricted any development to keep it as habitat for endangered whales that migrated through those waters. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had designated it as critical for species like gray whales, requiring federal review for any changes whatsoever. This meant no mortgages or contracts without agency approval, as it could violate environmental laws. Rather put a spanner in the works for any would-be developers. I kept quiet about this at first, knowing my family would fight it tooth and nail. Over time, I submitted more data on whale sightings, strengthening the protections. Added observation equipment near the shore, documenting migration patterns for reports. Built up the legal fortress brick by brick, as it were. Deborah's troubles escalated about 3 years ago. Her side investments crashed spectacularly. First the cryptocurrency, Bitcoin or something equally incomprehensible. Then a boutique she opened that closed after 6 months. Bad location apparently, though I suspect bad management might have played a role as well. She racked up debts like they were going out of fashion, and our parents bailed her out partially. But she needed more. Always more. "Let me handle a mortgage on the house," she pressed during one particularly awkward visit. "It's sitting there unused whilst I'm drowning." I refused outright, cited maintenance costs, but she kept pushing like a door-to-door salesman who won't take no for an answer. Even suggested preliminary contracts with her investor contacts, as if I'd simply hand over legal rights to my property because she'd made poor financial decisions. Family meetings turned tense, with Dad backing her up. "It's for the business," he said, as if that explained everything. Mum added, "Think of your sister, deploying the guilt like a tactical weapon." Laurie tried mediating but ultimately sided with them. Safety in numbers, I suppose. I stood firm, knowing the easements made her plans impossible. As her desperation grew, I suspected she'd try something dodgy, especially with my long trip to Maine coming up. She started networking with developers, hinting at access to the property she didn't actually have. Rather like selling tickets to a show you don't own. Deborah's attempts didn't stop with those visits. They escalated as her debts mounted higher. Started calling daily, leaving voicemails about how the mortgage could clear her slate. I deleted most without responding, focusing instead on my work. One does have actual responsibilities. After all, one evening, she appeared with a stack of forms from her investors, insisting I review them. "It's just a preliminary step," she said, all smiles and false cheer. I scanned the documents. Years of reading scientific papers makes you quite good at skimming rubbish, and handed them back, stating firmly that I wouldn't sign. She accused me of hoarding the property out of spite, because obviously the only reason one wouldn't commit fraud is spite. I explained it was about honoring our grandparents' wishes. The conversation ended with her slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frames. She vowed to find another way. Ominous, that. To safeguard the site further, I ordered specialized gear for my marine studies. Underwater sensors for current patterns, acoustic recorders for whale sounds. Growing them up, setting them up properly really, required coordination with local conservation groups who helped position everything without disturbing the habitat. The installation took weeks, involving trips to the house where I tested connections and calibrated data logs. Also consulted technicians for secure remote access, ensuring I could monitor from anywhere. Rather like setting up a very sophisticated burglar alarm, except for whales. Dad pulled me aside during a family barbecue. They do love their barbecues, Americans, suggesting I reconsider. "Deborah's in over her head," he confided, as if I hadn't noticed. Mum overheard and joined in, saying, "A little flexibility could save her business." Laurie watched from afar, not intervening. She'd perfected the art of being present but not involved. I reiterated my stance, mentioned the easements in passing, but they waved it off as minor hurdles. Minor hurdles. As if federal law were merely a suggestion. Deborah's investments continued failing with impressive consistency. Her latest venture, a real estate flip in downtown Seattle, fell through when buyers backed out. Creditors started ringing her office, and she turned to me again for help, like a bad penny turning up. "One signature," she pleaded over lunch, pushing a document across the table. "That's all it takes." I refused once more, citing the legal binds. She left frustrated, but I sensed her planning something behind my back. Could practically hear the gears turning. With the main project looming, I scheduled a meeting with Travis at his office. He examined recent title searches and noted unusual activity from her contacts. "We should reinforce your position," he recommended, tapping his pen against his notepad. He drafted notices to send to potential lenders, warning of the easements and potential violations. If anyone proceeded without approval, we'd report it to the proper channels straight away. Travis also advised updating my insurance to cover any unauthorized access. "This protects against claims," he noted. I agreed, signing the forms he prepared. We discussed contingency plans for quick legal action, like generals planning a defensive campaign. As departure neared, Deborah made a last-ditch effort at Mum's birthday dinner. "Let me connect you with my investors," she offered, all sweetness and light. I declined politely, explaining the restrictions again. She rolled her eyes, subtle that, but I caught her exchanging glances with Dad. Something was definitely brewing. Before flying out, I met Travis one more time to transfer monitoring access. He took detailed notes on the property setup and promised regular checks. "Any sign of improper filings, I'll alert the agencies," he assured me. The 18-month assignment in Maine involved daily fieldwork on erosion sites. Rather engrossing work actually, if you can appreciate watching land disappear at a glacial pace. But I kept tabs through secure applications. Travis's updates came steadily, confirming quiet at first. Then subtle signs emerged. Queries from lenders tied to Deborah's network. I prepared for the inevitable, knowing the easements would block any move. Rather like watching storm clouds gather whilst you're safely indoors. 2 days after that infamous dinner where I learned my house had been sold, I drove out to the property in Washington to check things firsthand. The trip from Seattle took a couple of hours, giving me time to mentally prepare for whatever nonsense awaited. When I arrived, yellow survey flags dotted the shoreline near the property line, marked spots for potential docks or expansions, clearly from investors scouting the site. Bold of them, really, marking property they didn't own. I pulled out my phone and took photographs of every flag, noting their positions relative to the easement boundaries. Also documented tire tracks from recent vehicles and collected business cards the survey crew had left behind. Evidence, you see. Always collect your evidence. Back in the car, I rang Travis and described what I'd found. He listened quietly before responding that it matched the lender queries he'd flagged. This confirms unauthorized activity, he said, and I could hear him already making notes. Without delay, Travis contacted the local police department, filing a report for suspected property fraud. Included copies of the easements and my ownership documents, emphasizing the federal protections. The officers took it seriously, one does like competent police, promising to investigate the survey company's involvement. By afternoon, Travis forwarded confirmation that the report was logged, with referrals to state real estate regulators. He also notified the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service about potential easement breaches. When federal agencies get involved, things become rather serious rather quickly. The investors, a couple from Portland looking for coastal flips, apparently, soon realized the deal was absolutely bogus. Their lawyer reached out to Travis after discovering the preliminary contract Deborah had pushed lacked my signature. Rather important detail that. One might even call it essential. They demanded explanations, and when Deborah stalled, they filed a civil lawsuit for misrepresentation and breach of contract. The suit sought damages for their time and expenses, plus punitive fees to deter future scams. They attached evidence of her promises, including emails and meeting notes. Thorough people, these Portlanders. Deborah's phone started ringing off the hook from her creditors and the investors' legal team. She left frantic messages for Dad and Mum, but they couldn't help much. The lawsuit papers arrived at her office the following week, listing me as a witness. Travis advised me to provide an affidavit detailing the easements and her unauthorized actions. I complied, sticking to facts without emotion. Just the facts, ma'am, as they say in those old detective shows. As the case built momentum, Deborah's business partners distanced themselves like rats from a sinking ship. Cancelled joint ventures, stopped returning calls. Nobody wants to be associated with fraud, turns out. One evening, my phone buzzed with her number. I let it go to voicemail at first. I was having dinner, and one does have standards, but curiosity won eventually. Her voice cracked as she spoke, absolutely broken. "They caught me," she whispered into the recording. She begged me to vouch that I'd approved the contract verbally. As if verbal approval would override written law and missing signatures, I texted back 3 words. "Too late, loser." The message felt final, cutting off her pleas. Perhaps harsh, but then again, she had slapped me and called me a loser first. What goes around, as they say. Travis updated me that the police had interviewed the survey crew, who admitted working on Deborah's referral without verifying ownership. Rather embarrassing for them. Professionally speaking. Regulators opened their own probe into her license status. The investors' suit gained traction quickly, with a court date set for preliminary hearings. Deborah tried rallying the family, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Rather impressive term for deliberate fraud. Laurie expressed doubts after reviewing the basics, which was something at least. Dad attempted to negotiate with the investors privately, offering settlements from his own funds, but they refused. They wanted full accountability, and frankly, couldn't blame them. Mum worried about the publicity hitting local business networks. Nothing travels faster than scandal in small business communities, except perhaps gossip at village fetes. Through it all, I stayed detached, letting the legal process unfold like a slow-motion avalanche. Travis handled my side, ensuring my statement supported the facts. The easements held strong, blocking any claims on the property, rather like a castle wall holding against siege. As word spread in Seattle's real estate circles, Deborah's reputation took hit after hit. Clients pulled out of deals. Colleagues avoided her at industry events. Online reviews mentioned the ongoing dispute. In the modern age, your reputation follows you everywhere, doesn't it? Can't simply move to the next town and start fresh anymore. A week after the lawsuit filing, Dad texted me to come over for an urgent talk. When I arrived at their Seattle home, the whole family waited in the living room like a tribunal. Mum sat twisting her hands anxiously. Laurie paced by the window. Deborah looked absolutely exhausted, puffy eyes from stress and tears. Dad started straight away, explaining they'd heard from the investor's lawyer demanding settlement. "We can fix this together," he said, as if family solidarity could override fraud charges. Mum chimed in, describing how the news was spreading amongst their clients like wildfire through dry grass. Deborah cut to the chase, admitting she'd pushed the contract too far. "Just tell them you were okay with it," she urged, as if lying under oath were a reasonable family favor. I shook my head, reminding them the easements made it legally impossible. Can't contract away federal protection, no matter how many family members ask nicely. Laurie suggested a family mediator, but I pointed out that wouldn't change the facts. Facts are rather stubborn that way. Dad offered to pay part of the damages from his savings if I withdrew as a witness. "It's about unity," he pressed, playing the family card. Mum nodded vigorously. "The business can't survive the scandal." Deborah promised to cut ties with those investors if I helped smooth things over. Rather like promising to stop robbing banks after you've already been caught. I listened as they outlined plans to counter the claims. Travis had warned me about this sort of pressure. Families always close ranks, even around the guilty party, so I rang him on speakerphone. He joined the conversation remotely, outlining the suit's progress with professional detachment. "The court has scheduled depositions," he explained, adjusting his tone for the audience. He recommended sticking to the process, noting that pulling back now could raise suspicions. "Continuing the civil action ensures accountability," Travis added, pointing out the investors sought full reimbursement plus legal fees. Dad argued it was excessive, but Travis countered that misrepresentation in real estate carried standard penalties. Rather established law, actually. I agreed with him, stating clearly I wouldn't interfere. Deborah grew agitated, accusing me of enjoying the fallout. Enjoying. As if watching one's family implode were entertainment. Mum tried calming her, but the room grew tense enough to cut with a knife. Laurie asked if there was any compromise, like a partial statement. Travis advised against it, saying half measures could complicate my position legally. He detailed potential outcomes, including asset freezes if ignored. Rather sobering list, that. I ended the call and faced them directly, refusing to budge. "This started with unauthorized actions," I said simply. The meeting dragged on with more pleas, more pressure, more attempts at emotional manipulation. But I held firm as bedrock. By evening, Deborah received notice of the first hearing date. Her phone pinged constantly with emails from partners questioning her ethics. One major client canceled a project outright, citing the ongoing dispute. Dad's firm lost a referral network contact who'd heard about the case through industry channels. Mum mentioned neighbors whispering at their club events. The social fallout was immediate and brutal. Deborah's social media filled with subtle unfollows from professional connections. In the modern world, you can actually watch your network dissolve in real time. Rather dystopian, when you think about it. The local real estate association launched a review of her practices, threatening suspension. When your professional body investigates you, you know you've made rather a mess of things. As the suit advanced, witnesses from the survey team submitted statements confirming her instructions. The investor's lawyer pushed for discovery, uncovering her financial records. Deborah's attempts to settle privately failed when they insisted on public acknowledgement. They wanted the record clear, and rightly so. Family friends stopped inviting them to gatherings, wary of association. Guilt by proximity, as it were. Dad's deals slowed as lenders hesitated, suddenly cautious about the family name. Mum avoided her usual social circles, embarrassed by the gossip. Lori's internship offers dried up due to the family name appearing in background checks. Rather unfortunate for her, being the one family member who'd actually tried to stay neutral. Deborah faced mounting bills from her own lawyer, dipping into savings she didn't really have. The court granted a motion for summary judgment on key points, favoring the investors. Media outlets picked up the story as a cautionary tale in Seattle business news. Local real estate agent caught in fraud scheme makes rather compelling reading over breakfast. Apparently, Deborah's license came under formal scrutiny, with hearings scheduled. The family's reputation suffered what you might call irreversible damage in their tight-knit community. Creditors tightened terms on existing loans, adding financial strain to the emotional catastrophe. 3 months after the initial court motions, the judge delivered the verdict against Deborah. The investors won on all counts, with the ruling highlighting her deliberate misrepresentation of the property status. Had to pay back their full advance plus interest, totaling over $200,000 in restitution. The court also imposed additional fines for violating state real estate regulations, draining what remained of her accounts. Rather thorough punishment, but then fraud is rather serious. Deborah appealed immediately, but her lawyer warned the chances were slim given the evidence stack. Mountains of evidence, really. In the meantime, she liquidated personal assets, sold her car, downsized her apartment, to cover the immediate payments. The association revoked her professional certification after their review, barring her from practicing for 5 years minimum. Career over, essentially. Rather difficult to work in real estate without a license. Former colleagues stopped returning her calls entirely. Job applications went unanswered as word circulated through the industry. One investor posted a review on industry forums detailing the ordeal without naming her directly, but leaving enough clues for insiders to connect the dots. Rather like a very public pillory. Deborah's social circle shrank overnight, invitations to networking events vanishing like morning dew. She spent evenings alone, scrolling through profiles of people who distanced themselves. Modern isolation has a particular sting to it, doesn't it? Dad's firm felt the ripple effects first. Longtime partners hesitated on joint projects, citing concerns over liability. One major contract fell through when the client referenced the case in their withdrawal letter. Revenue dipped by 30% that quarter, forcing him to lay off staff and cut bonuses. The business he'd built for decades began crumbling. Mum's community groups whispered behind her back, and she stepped down from a board position to avoid awkward questions. Social death by 1,000 cuts. Lori's career stalled completely, with recruiters pulling offers after background checks flagged the family connection. Guilt by association claimed another victim. The once close unit now met rarely, conversations strained by unspoken blame and resentment. I watched from afar, receiving updates through public records rather than direct contact. Rather like observing a slow-motion car crash through a telescope. Travis handled the final witness confirmations, ensuring my affidavit stood unchallenged. With the case closed, I blocked their numbers one by one, starting with Deborah's. No more pleas or accusations reached me. I relocated my base to a small rental near the Maine coast, diving deeper into erosion studies without distractions. Weekends brought solo hikes along protected shores where I analyzed data undisturbed. Professional networks expanded as I presented findings at conferences, free from family ties pulling me backwards. The house in Washington remained secure, its easements intact against future threats. Conservation groups praised the outcome, using it as a case study in their workshops. How federal easements protected critical habitat from development schemes became a rather popular presentation, apparently. Protecting personal boundaries meant saying no without guilt, even to blood relatives. Particularly to blood relatives, actually. Family can be the most demanding precisely because they feel entitled to demand. Valuing the environment taught me resilience, turning potential loss into lasting strength. The house my grandparents left me remained exactly what they intended, a sanctuary for marine life, a research station for conservation, and a reminder that some things matter more than money. I never did reconcile with Deborah, nor Dad, Nor Mum, really. Laurie and I exchange Christmas cards, which is something, I suppose. She eventually found work in another city, far enough away that the family name didn't follow her quite so persistently. The whales still migrate through those waters every year. I monitor them from my equipment, watching the patterns shift and change with the seasons. Grey whales, magnificent creatures, completely oblivious to the human drama their habitat protection caused. Sometimes I walk the beach where those yellow survey flags once stood, long since removed. The shore remains untouched, unspoiled, exactly as my grandparents wanted. Exactly as it should be. Was I harsh? Perhaps. Could I have been more forgiving? Possibly. But forgiveness without accountability is just enabling, isn't it? And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their actions. They learn, or they don't. Either way, you've maintained your integrity. The property is still mine, still protected, still serving its purpose as critical marine habitat. I've added more monitoring equipment over the years, contributed to several major studies on coastal ecosystem health. The research station, because that's essentially what it's become, has helped identify migration pattern shifts that inform conservation policy. My grandparents would be proud, I think. They understood that stewardship means protecting something for future generations, even when your own family can't see past immediate profit. They trusted me with that responsibility, and I've honored it. On quiet evenings, I sit on the porch watching the sunset over the Pacific, cup of tea in hand, because some habits are worth keeping, no matter which side of the Atlantic you're on, and I think about choices. About the paths we take and the stands we make. My career flourished after cutting ties with my family. Turns out, removing toxic relationships creates space for healthy ones. I've built a professional network of fellow researchers and conservationists who value the work over profit margins. We collaborate on projects, share data, support each other's research. I've published papers on coastal erosion patterns, whale migration shifts due to climate change, and the effectiveness of marine protected areas. The work continues, season after season, tide after tide. The house stands as testament to what matters: preservation over profit, long-term thinking over short-term gain, principle over convenience. It's not dramatic or exciting most days. Just steady, consistent work protecting something precious. And that really is what this whole tangled tale comes down to. Not revenge, though I won't pretend there wasn't some satisfaction in watching the legal system work exactly as intended. Not even family drama, though there was certainly plenty of that. It's about knowing what you value and protecting it, even when everyone around you calls you impractical, stubborn, or foolish. Even when your own family turns against you. Especially then, actually. The ocean doesn't care about property values or investment returns. The whales don't care about family loyalty or business ventures. They simply exist, migrating through waters they've traveled for millennia, needing protection from human short-sightedness. My grandparents understood that. They set up the easements decades ago, thinking ahead to a future they wouldn't see, protecting habitat for creatures that couldn't protect themselves. They chose me as the heir because they knew I'd honor that commitment. I like to think I have. So yes, my sister sold my house for $500,000. Or tried to. The house that couldn't be sold, to investors who couldn't develop it, under contracts that couldn't be enforced. It was doomed from the start, rather like a comedy sketch if the consequences hadn't been so severe. The property remains exactly where it's always been, protected by law and surrounded by the ocean my grandparents loved. I remain its steward, carrying forward their legacy. And somewhere in Seattle, my former family deals with the consequences of choices they made, trying to profit from something that was never theirs to sell. I don't think about them much anymore, if I'm honest. The work is too engaging, the research too important, the ocean too vast and beautiful to waste time on old resentments. Sometimes, late at night when the fog rolls in and the foghorns sound, I wonder if things could have been different. If there was some magical combination of words that would have made them understand. But probably not. Some people see a pristine coastline and think, development opportunity. Others see it and think, precious ecosystem to protect. We were always going to end up on opposite sides of that divide. The tea's gone cold now, sitting beside my laptop as I type up field notes. Rather metaphorical, that. Something's cool naturally with time and distance. The anger I felt at that dinner table, the shock of being slapped by my own sister, the disgust at watching my family applaud fraud, all of it has settled into something calmer. Not forgiveness, exactly, but acceptance. They are who they are. I am who I am. And never the twain shall meet, as Kipling wrote, though he was talking about East and West rather than conservationists and property developers. I've built a life I'm genuinely proud of, which is more than many people can say. The work matters. The research contributes to something larger than myself. The house serves its intended purpose. My grandparents' legacy continues. There's a certain poetry to it, really. They gave me the gift of place and purpose, wrapped up in waterfront property and conservation easements. They gave me the tools to resist family pressure and protect something precious. They gave me, quite literally, a hill to die on, or in this case, a coastline to defend. I've defended it rather well, if I do say so myself. The students I mentor now, young researchers passionate about marine conservation, remind me why this all mattered. They visit the house-turned-research station during field study trips, marveling at the untouched coastline. How did you keep it like this? They ask, looking at the pristine shore. Federal easements and family estrangement, I reply cheerfully. In that order. They laugh, thinking I'm joking. I let them think that. The full story is rather too complicated for casual conversation, and besides, it's more cautionary tale than cocktail party anecdote. But the truth is, keeping it like this required saying no to people I loved, or thought I loved, or was supposed to love because we shared DNA. Required standing firm when they pressured, guilt, manipulated, and finally attacked me. Required being called impractical, selfish, stubborn, and a loser. Required being slapped and shoved out of a family dinner. Required watching them face legal consequences without rushing to their rescue. None of it was easy. Some of it still stings, if I'm completely honest. In that way old wounds do when the weather changes. But it was necessary. You can't protect something precious by being weak. Can't conserve habitat by giving in to development pressure. Can't honor your principles by abandoning them when family demands it. I learned that lesson thoroughly, if painfully. The house stands. The whales swim. The research continues. And I sleep soundly at night, which is worth more than family dinners that were never particularly pleasant anyway. Looking back now, years removed from that dramatic revelation and subsequent legal catastrophe, I can see the whole affair with something approaching clarity. My sister wasn't evil, just desperate and foolish. My parents weren't villains, just people who valued money over ecosystems and family loyalty over legality. They made their choices. I made mine. The law made its ruling. That's really all there is to it, stripped of drama and emotion. A simple story of competing values and the consequences of acting on them. The ocean doesn't care about our human complications. It just keeps rolling in, tide after tide, wearing down stone and building up beaches, following rhythms older than human civilization. The whales keep migrating, following instincts coded into their very beings over millions of years of evolution. And I keep studying it all, documenting changes, contributing to conservation efforts, protecting this small stretch of coastline that my grandparents entrusted to me. It's a good life. A purposeful life. A life my grandparents would recognize and approve of, even if my parents never will. Sometimes people ask if I regret how it all turned out. Don't you miss your family? They ask, with that concerned tone people use when they think you've made a terrible mistake. I consider the question honestly each time. Miss them. Perhaps I miss the idea of them, the family I wished I had rather than the one I actually did. Miss the fantasy of supportive relatives who valued my work and respected my choices. But miss the reality? The constant pressure, the belittling of my career, the attempts to manipulate me into funding their schemes, the culminating fraud and assault? No. Can't say I miss that terribly much. What I've gained in their absence far outweighs what I've lost. Peace, primarily. The ability to focus on my work without constant interference or demands. Professional relationships based on mutual respect rather than genetic obligation. A clear conscience about protecting the property as intended. And perhaps most importantly, the knowledge that I can trust myself. That when faced with enormous pressure from multiple people I'd known my entire life, I held firm to what I knew was right. That's worth more than awkward family Christmases, frankly. The conservation community has embraced this case as an example of how easements can protect critical habitat even against family pressure to develop. I've been invited to speak at several conferences about it, though I always focus on the legal and environmental aspects rather than the personal drama. The Reed property appears in case studies now, cited in papers about effective use of conservation easements. My grandparents' foresight in enrolling it decades ago is recognized as exemplary long-term thinking. They've become minor heroes in conservation circles, which would have amused them greatly. They just wanted to save on taxes and protect the whales they loved watching from their porch. Didn't realize they were creating a legal fortress that would withstand determined assault decades later. But that's the thing about good conservation planning. It outlasts individual lifetimes, continues protecting habitat long after the people who established it are gone. Those easements will continue protecting that coastline after I'm gone too, passing to whomever inherits it next with the same unbreakable restrictions. The land itself is protected in perpetuity. That's rather magnificent when you think about it. In a world where so much is temporary and disposable, something genuinely permanent and protected. My sister never understood that. Still doesn't, I imagine, though I haven't spoken to her in years. To her it was always just valuable real estate being wasted on conservation. She saw dollar signs where I saw whale migration routes. Two completely incompatible worldviews, really. Dad's firm eventually recovered somewhat, though never to its former glory. The scandal tainted the family name in Seattle real estate circles permanently. He sold the business a few years ago and retired quietly, or so I heard through the industry grapevine. Mum apparently moved to Arizona, seeking a fresh start where nobody knew about the case. Can't blame her for that, really. Sometimes geography is the only cure for reputational damage. Lori built a successful career eventually, far from Seattle and using her married name to distance herself from the family scandal. We exchange emails occasionally, careful neutral messages about work and weather, avoiding any mention of that period. Some wounds don't heal, they just get covered over with polite distance. And Deborah? Last I heard, she was working in retail management somewhere. Can't practice real estate without a license, after all, and hers remains revoked. The $200,000 in restitution took years to pay off, I understand. Bankruptcy might have been involved, though I never followed up on details. Her life was thoroughly derailed by one foolish attempt to commit fraud, thinking she could sell property that wasn't hers and I wouldn't notice or couldn't stop it. Pride goeth before destruction, and all that biblical wisdom. Sometimes I wonder if she ever understood why it all collapsed. If she grasped that the problem wasn't me being stubborn or unforgiving, but her attempting to commit federal crimes. If she ever took responsibility beyond the forced legal accountability. Probably not. People rarely do, in my experience. Much easier to blame circumstances or other people than examine your own choices honestly. But that's not my concern anymore. She made her choices, faced the consequences, and lives with the results. I made mine, protected the property, and continue the work I love. Different paths leading to vastly different destinations. The beauty of the natural world is that it operates beyond human drama. The tide doesn't care about lawsuits. The kelp forests don't care about family feuds. The whales don't care about property values or conservation easements. They simply exist, following the patterns of nature, oblivious to the human complications that swirl around their habitat protection. I find that deeply comforting, actually. In a world full of human mess and drama, there's something solid and real about ecological research. Observable patterns, measurable data, natural systems that operate according to principles older and more reliable than human promises. The ocean was here billions of years before humans evolved, and it'll be here billions of years after we're gone. That perspective helps when dealing with temporary human problems like family estrangement. In the grand scheme of geological time and evolutionary processes, my family drama is less than a blink. Utterly insignificant. But the habitat protection, that matters. That has lasting impact beyond individual human lives. So yes, I lost my family over this. But I preserved critical marine habitat for future generations. I honored my grandparents' legacy. I contributed to conservation efforts that will outlast me by centuries. Seems like a fair trade, really. The work continues, as work does. New research questions emerge, requiring new studies and new data collection. Climate change affects migration patterns, requiring constant monitoring and adjustment. Each season brings fresh challenges and discoveries. I've expanded the monitoring equipment over the years, adding more sophisticated sensors and recording devices. The property has become something of a model research station, hosting visiting scientists and graduate students conducting field work. My grandparents' house, once just a family residence, now serves science. The living room is full of computers and data analysis equipment. The spare bedrooms host visiting researchers. The porch where they watched whales is now an observation platform with mounted telescopes and recording devices. It's become what they always wanted it to be, really, a place where nature is studied and protected rather than exploited. That transformation feels like victory, in its own quiet way. Not the dramatic courtroom victory that prevented the fraud, but the long-term victory of purpose and preservation. Every published paper using data from the site, every graduate student who completes field work there, every conservation policy informed by our research, these are the real victories. The meaningful ones. My sister tried to sell this for $500,000, as if money could measure its true value. But you can't put a price on critical habitat, on research opportunities, on protected coastline that will remain wild forever. Some things are genuinely priceless, and not in the commercial sense. Priceless because they exist outside the whole system of pricing and value and monetary worth. The conservation easements my grandparents established recognized that truth. They took the property out of the commercial market permanently, dedicated it to preservation rather than profit. That was their gift, really. Not just the house itself, but the vision of what it could be and the legal protections to ensure it stayed that way. I've simply been the steward of their vision, protecting it from those who couldn't see beyond property values. As I sit here now, finishing this rather long tale over yet another cup of tea, proper tea, mind you, none of this herbal nonsense, I can hear the ocean through the open window. Constant, rhythmic, eternal. The same sound my grandparents heard from this house decades ago. The same sound future researchers will hear decades from now. Unchanging in its fundamental nature, though always changing in its details. Rather like good principles, actually. The fundamentals remain constant even as circumstances shift. Protecting this place was the right choice. Remains the right choice. Will always be the right choice, regardless of family opinions or property values or investment opportunities. Some decisions aren't complicated once you're clear on your values. This was one of them. So there you have it. The full tale of how my sister tried to sell my house, committed fraud, faced legal consequences, and destroyed our family in the process. All over property she never owned and could never have legally sold. Rather Shakespearean in its combination of ambition, foolishness, and inevitable tragedy, though Shakespeare would probably have added more poetry and fewer conservation easements. The moral, if there is one, might be this. Know what you value, protect it fiercely, and don't expect family to support you if your values conflict with their financial interests. Or perhaps, conservation easements are remarkably effective tools, so do use them if you want to protect land permanently. Or maybe simply, the ocean endures, principles matter, and tea tastes better when you're at peace with your choices. Take your pick. They're all true in their way. Now then, I've got data to analyze and reports to write. The whales won't study themselves, and someone needs to document their migration patterns for this season. The work, as always, continues. And that's exactly how my grandparents would have wanted it. Cheers.